if I'm being honest with you, because I want to be, believe that you are being used as a pawn by the right and that you're a charlatan of sorts.
I don't think there's any evidence I've been co-opted by anyone, and I think that that's an ad hominem tactic people use to not address really the important conversations we're having here.
If there is systemic racism that's inherent in the constitutional republic that is the United States of America, and some people have historically benefited from that systemic racism, Sunny Hostin is, well, sort of Exhibit A, isn't she? All right, the ladies on The View hosted an author. His name is Coleman Hughes, and he's got a brand new book that suggests that maybe the best way to mend racial relations in America today is for us to do our utmost to transcend identifying everyone in our lives based on the color of their skin and instead judging them on the content of their character. Boy, oh boy, does that sound familiar. That's a radical new idea, apparently, to the academic left, where they've been inundated with the Ibram X. Kendi anti-racism mantra that race is everything. And if you try to judge somebody based on who they are and how they behave and what their internal values and character are, rather than judging them preconditionally on the color of their skin, that you are, in fact, the racist. That's right. That's right. You must immediately evaluate someone based on the color of their skin and make a predetermined notion on who they are, what they believe, and how they behave solely based on their color of their skin. Otherwise, you're racist, which, again, by the way, is the opposite of reality. The definition of racism is prejudging people based on the color of their skin. But this is the world we're living in right now. And that is the prevailing thought in academia, and it's the prevailing thought at the levers of government right now, either at the Pentagon or in the Biden administration and every other department. Everything is shot through the lens of anti-racism, critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, this young man, a very smart and well-spoken young man, stood out and said, maybe there's a better way here. He studied Martin Luther King's ideas and dreams and put together a book. And he was invited on The View. And the ladies of The View, although they behaved themselves in a relatively polite way, decided to call this man ignorant, naive, and racist, or at best, an Uncle Tom. Now, we're going to watch quite a bit of this. And really, I think the thing that is most striking is how Mr. Hughes conducts himself here with dignity, with patience, with tolerance. And he never rose to what they were trying to do to him. And he should be commended because he's a better man than I. Take a look.
Arguments for a colorblind America. What do you mean when you say that?
So a lot of people equate colorblindness to I don't see race or to pretending not to see race. I think that's a big mistake. We should try our very best to treat people without regard to race, both in our personal lives and our public policy.
Of course.
It has become very popular to, in the name of anti-racism, teach a kind of philosophy to our children and in general that says your race is everything.
When I went to school, there was no black history. None of those things were taught. And here in America, that's how people saw you. I don't want to say it's your youth, but I think you have a point, but I think you have to also take into consideration what people have lived through. Women couldn't get into colleges. If you were a black person, there were a lot of colleges wouldn't accept you. Trying to equal the playing field. I think that's what a lot of folks have been trying to do.
Quick interjection here, and then we'll get back to the video. Understand what Whoopi Goldberg is doing here. First of all, diminishing him and saying it without saying it, that you're young and you're naive and you don't know the struggle we went through, number one. Number two, Whoopi Goldberg was discovered in her early 20s back in 1984 by a film director, Mike Nichols. She was doing a sort of stand-up one-woman show in the New York's Greenwich Village. He discovered her, helped her develop it into a one-woman show, and put it on Broadway at the Lyceum Theater in 1985. It was. I know this because I saw the show as a young person because my uncle was the stage manager of the show. I met Whoopi Goldberg back then. This was before Color Purple. This is before Ghost, before The View, before everything that she did. She didn't go to college either. She's trying to explain that when she went to school, it was awful, it was racist, it was terrible. Whoopi Goldberg is a multi-millionaire who doesn't really work for a living. She sits on her fat ass now and delivers her opinion that nobody gives a crap about. She's won an Emmy, she's won a Grammy, she's won an Oscar, and she's won a Tony. And she's sitting there saying, you don't know how racist this country is, young man. I know. What does she know? Also, Last I checked, Whoopi Goldberg exclusively dates white men. Frank Langella for a long time, and then Tony Danson when he wasn't. Sorry, Tony. Oh God, the guy from Cheers. Oh, Larry. I was on such a roll. This is what happens. I do this thing without a script. I get all into it. I get rolling, and then I trip over one thing, and it all grinds to a halt.
I can't help you out on this one.
Kevin, you can't help me on this? Oh my God, Sam from Cheers. It is Sam Malone. Yeah, Sam Malone. What's the actor's name? For God's sake, people. Why can't I? Ted Danson. I said Tony Danson. That's where I got stuck. Dates almost exclusively white men. Frank Langella for a while there, and then Ted Danson. Although, to be fair, Ted Danson famously did appear at a birthday party for Whoopi Goldberg wearing blackface. And Whoopi thought it was hilarious. But you, sir, you young man, have no idea how racist this country is. If it weren't so racist, I would have won 2 Emmys and 2 Grammys and 2 Oscars and 2 Tonys. Ted Danson. Thank you. Everyone in the chat now at Rumble is helping me out with that. I appreciate it, Sarah, and reference design. Yes, Tony Danson. I converged Ted Danson with Tony Danza. See, my 80s sitcoms collided and merged. Totally understandable. All right, so that's Whoopi's contribution. This pampered, rich, fat-ass woman sitting there literally does nothing for a living except for an hour reads from her cards and calls Republicans nasty names. But she wants to tell this man about the reality of racism. All right, fine. Do your thing, Whoopi.
That's your experience, and that's valid. You know, as a counterpoint, when I was in 5th grade, we all watched Roots together.
Yeah.
In public school.
Yeah.
So these are different experiences. I think it's also different generations.
Mm-hmm.
It's different parts of the country, right? We have very different cultures all living together in one country. So I'm not going to deny that. But I view this notion of a colorblind society similar to the idea of a peaceful society, which is to say it's an ideal, it's a North Star. And the point is not that we're ever going to get there. We're not going to touch it, but we have to know when we're going forward and when we're going backwards. And we're going backwards when we're doing woke kindergarten in San Francisco, you know, with you didn't hear about this story?
No, but
wait, because I want to get to the part of the book. You believe that public policies that address socioeconomic differences would be better at benefiting disadvantaged groups, and that race-based policies often hurt the very people they're trying to help. What are some examples of policies that would be better at reducing racial disparities?
So my overall argument is that class, socioeconomics, is a better proxy for disadvantage. We all want to help the disadvantaged, and the question is, how do we identify them, right? The default right now in a lot of areas of policy is to use, you know, Black and Hispanic identity as a proxy for disadvantage. And my argument is that you actually get a better picture of who needs help by looking at socioeconomics and income. That picks out people in a more accurate way.
Well,
right? So,
and not my question, but when you say that socioeconomics picks out people in a better way than race, when you do look at the socioeconomics, you see the huge disparity between white households and Black households. You see the huge disparity between white households and Hispanic households. So your argument, and I've read your book twice because I wanted to give it a chance, your argument that race has no place in that equation is really fundamentally flawed in my opinion.
Well, first of all, that may be the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Seriously, follow the logic of what Sonny Hostin just said. The premise that's being debated here now is that if we truly want to help the disadvantaged in this country, we really shouldn't look at people's race because, well, take Whoopi for an example, or you, Sonny Hostin, for example. Sonny, why should your child get some sort of preference over a white or Asian kid who lives in impoverished Appalachia, right? If we really want to help people rise up from their economic and social and cultural disadvantage, you, Sonny, your child living in the Upper West Side of Manhattan with $1 million household surely shouldn't receive anything. Let's just look at the actual reality of the financial depredation, the diminishment that a person is living through. And Sonny Hostin's retort to that is, well, if you look at the averages, it's Black and brown families that are making less money and being hurt social economically. So if we just focus on race, that'll solve the problem. It is incredibly ignorant. It is in fact the stupidest thing. So since on average there's a disparity between white households and non-white households, if we just give an advantage to all of the non-white households, that'll even the playing field. Well, that's what we've been doing. How's that working out, son? One would almost suspect that she's just trying to protect the good deal she's got going. Right? It seems that way.
Hey, Larry.
Well, there's two sides.
Yeah.
Do you remember that video of Sonny Hostin learning that she is actually the descendant of slave owners?
Yeah, let's not forget that.
I think that's important.
If there is systemic racism that's inherent in the constitutional republic that is the United States of America, and some people have historically benefited from that systemic racism, Sonny Hostin is, well, sort of exhibit A, isn't she? I mean, let's face it, the only way she got where she is because she's descendant of slave owners. Crack the whip, Sonny. You're doing great.
Separate questions. One is whether each racial group is socioeconomically the same. That I agree with you. They're not.
Yeah, they're
course.
not, and the
The
stats
question is-
show that.
But yeah, of course, I agree with that fully. The question is, how do you address that in the way that actually targets poverty the best?
Great.
And what Martin Luther King wrote in his book, Why We Can't Wait, is he called it, we need a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged. And he said, yes, we should address racial inequality. Yes, we should address the legacy of slavery. But the way to do that is on the basis of class. And that will disproportionately target Blacks and Hispanics because they're disproportionately poor, but it will be doing so in a way that also helps the white poor, in a way that addresses poverty as the thing to be addressed.
That part is true, but as you are a student of Dr. King, I'm not only a student of Dr. King, I know his daughter, Bernice, right? So I'm going to get to my question.
Go ahead, go right ahead.
I think the premise is fundamentally flawed. You claim that color blindness was the goal of the civil rights movement, based upon Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, content of character versus the color of skin. Bernice, Dr. King's daughter, points out that 4 years after giving that speech, actually,
I'm gonna let you finish, Sonny. But do you know? I mentioned earlier that Whoopi Goldberg just sits on her ass and reads from her cue cards. Do you see what I'm talking about here? These are professional broadcasters whose whole job it is to talk to each other and interview people. And am I the only one who is annoyed by the fact that they can't even remember the one question they were going to ask their guest? They all have to write it down and read it from their cards. What is wrong with them? How hard is it? The hardest part of their job today is going to be asking this person one question, and even that they have to write down. That said, the fundamental flaw in this question, you may have studied Martin Luther King, but I know his daughter. So what? Again, this is why Coleman Hughes is a much better man than I. Because my only answer would be, so the F what? Here comes the question, though.
Dr. King also
We're on card number 2 here, by the way. Card number 2 for the question.
said this: a society that has done something special against the Negro for hundreds of years must now do something special for Negroes. He also said in 1968, it was about less than a week before he was assassinated, this country never stops to realize that they owe a people kept in slavery for 244 years. So rather than class, he did write about that earlier on. Right before his death, he made the argument for racial equality and racial reparations. And so your argument for color blindness, I think, is something that the right has co-opted. And so many in the Black community, if I'm being honest with you, because I want to be, believe that you are being used as a pawn by the right, and that you're a charlatan of sorts.
He's not a Republican.
So how do you?
He's
who am I
never
being
voted
used
for a
as?
Republican.
You said that you're a conservative.
No, no.
No, you did. You actually said that in the podcast that you did 2 weeks ago.
I said I was a
He's not-
conservative.
Yes,
He's not-
yes, you did.
there's-
So, but my
you're
question to
he's
you,
not a
my question to you is, how do you respond to those critics?
Okay,
that
let's give
believe-
him, let him
so-
answer.
Okay, now we're going to hear his answer, but do you see the despicable disgusting racist thing that Sonny Hostin just did there. I'll get to the Martin Luther King thing in a moment after we hear Mr. Hughes's response. But this whole idea, by the way, let me just say, even if he is a conservative Republican, which he is not, I assure you, even if his message has been co-opted by the right, whatever the hell that means, did you see any actual challenge to the argument that he's making? This is a textbook ad hominem attack, but also done in this backhanded third-person way. There are some who are out there who will call you a charlatan. Sonny, grow some balls and call the man a charlatan. We know you think it, but instead of you telling him that face to face, you're like, well, there are some out there who will call you a charlatan. How does she keep her job? Well, we know how she keeps her job. And let me just be clear here. Even if he were a conservative Republican, even if he were a charlatan, even if his message was co-opted by the right, whatever that means, it could still be a very good idea. It could still be right. It could still be good. It could still be the thing that we should do. But she doesn't want to engage in that conversation. Instead, the message is sent to this young man and anyone else who might want to think the same way. This is how you'll be treated, you charlatan Uncle Tom. This is disgusting. This is disgusting. And any other person on that panel, any white person on that panel who did this would in fact be fired. Would absolutely in fact be fired, except maybe Joy Behar, because she wore blackface too in her past.
First thing I think it's very important. The quote that you just pointed out about doing something special for the Negro. That's from the book Why We Can't Wait that I just mentioned.
Yes.
A couple paragraphs later, he lays out exactly what that something special was.
Yes.
And it was the Bill of Rights for the Disadvantaged, a broad class-based
But
policy.
he also says you must include race.
No, he didn't. He says it's
Yes, he does.
Okay, well, everyone should go read the book Why We Can't Wait. Let's not get sidetracked by that.
Yeah.
I don't think I've been co-opted by anyone. I've only voted twice, both for Democrats. Although I'm an independent, I would vote for a Republican, probably a non-Trump Republican if they were compelling. I don't think there's any evidence I've been co-opted by anyone, and I think that's an ad hominem tactic people use to not address really the important conversations we're having here. And I think it's better, and it would be better for everyone if we stuck to the topics rather than make it about me with no evidence.
But I want to give you the opportunity to respond to
I appreciate
the criticism.
I appreciate it. There's no evidence that I've been co-opted by anyone. I have an independent podcast. I work for CNN as an analyst. I write for the Free Press. I'm independent in all of these endeavors, and no one is paying me to say what I'm saying. I'm saying it because I feel it.
Alyssa.
So, again, I cannot say enough about that young man. Coleman Hughes is his name, and I want to get his book now. I mean, who here thinks that maybe he knows a little bit more about what's in Martin Luther King's book and what was Martin Luther King's agenda than Sonny Hostin, who happens to know Martin Luther King's daughter? Freaking meaningless non sequitur. And I want to say this one last thing here about Martin Luther King, this rewriting of history and the recreation of Martin, because Ibram X. Kendi and Barbara D'Angelo and all these people who are trying to push this critical race theory, anti-racism crap on not just us and our governmental institutions, including our military, but on your children. The woke kindergarten class where 5-year-olds are divided by race and they're asked to look at each other based on the color of their skin instead of, you put a black kid and a white kid together and in a playground when they're 4 years old, and they'll be holding hands and playing and hugging each other because no one's taught them to be racist. Now they're being taught to be racist by the left in this country. While that's all being adjudicated, and you can go and look and see who has a better handle on who Martin Luther King was, the racist Sonny Hostin or Coleman Hughes, let me just say this about Martin Luther King, who I consider an American hero. If, in fact, Sonny Hostin is correct, and that the real legacy of Martin Luther King is, in fact, to judge each other based on the color of our skin and not on our values and the content of our character, if they're all trying to sort of say, oh, that thing he said in the Civil Rights March, where he said he had a dream that his daughters would grow up and they'd be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin, that thing he said, he didn't really mean it. That's not really his legacy. Oh, many years later, right before he was assassinated, he changed his mind about all that. Let me just say, on behalf of probably the majority of Americans, if that's true, if that's the case, if Martin Luther King's legacy is actually the opposite of the I Had a Dream speech and the judge everyone by the content of their character and not the color of his skin, if you want to erase that now, and that's not what he stands for, then we got to remove the federal holiday. We got to take down the monument in Washington, which is actually sadly not a great monument. He deserves better. If you want to rewrite his legacy to fit into the mold that you have now created in this post-racial equality America, where we're actually supposed to focus hyperly on race, then let's rethink the whole federal holiday and monument thing. Because that's not my Martin Luther King. And that's not the Martin Luther King that I was in favor of honoring in this country. One quick thing, by the way, about how the left has rewritten Martin Luther King's legacy. If you go to the memorial in Washington, D.C., it's just off the mall where he gave that speech. There's something very striking about it. There's the statue of Martin Luther King. I live in D.C., so I go to the monuments a lot. It's one of the perks of living here. It's got the beautiful statue of him. It's okay. I shouldn't call it beautiful, but it can be inspiring. Head to toe, standing there, looking off into the future, into a distant freedom that he's hoping for his progeny. That's one part of the memorial. The other part of the memorial is a wall that has famous quotations from Martin Luther King, famous statements that he made in all of his public speaking or in his writings. And there's something striking about what the left did when they designed this memorial to him. There's something striking about the sayings that they chose, the quotes from Martin Luther King. What do we know about Martin Luther King? The one identifying characteristic of him, other than the fact that he was a civil rights leader, what's the other thing that he was? What was his profession? What do you know? In fact, we call him this all that. The people who call him Dr. King, I don't like that. Yes, he was a doctor, but a doctor of what? A doctor of theology. You may like to call him Dr. King. I like to call him Reverend King. He was a man of the cloth. He was a pastor. He was a Christian. And you know what's fascinating about every single quote at the Martin Luther King Memorial in Washington, D.C., as you go and you look and you reflect on his life and his legacy and his message to the world? Not one quote makes any reference to God. Not one. The man was a reverend. His most powerful speeches, his most compelling arguments on behalf of civil rights were rooted in Christianity, were rooted in ethical monotheism. No matter your flavor of Judeo-Christian religion, he spoke to your heart and to your relationship with God and about the dignity of every human being created in God's image. And it never found its way to the Martin Luther King Memorial, created, designed by leftist Americans, leftist Democrats in this country. I'm sorry. I will not stand for this additional chapter being rewritten about Martin Luther King. Sunny Hostin should be ashamed of herself. Sunny Hostin should be fired. We know who on that stage in that appearance that you just saw best represented the Martin Luther King dream. And that was Coleman Hughes.